I will move on to Christina now. So Christina has been with us since 2013, Christina, right?
Yes. And then
So
I graduated 2017.
so she knows everything there is, about the program and the university and the faculty and all of that. And so she will give you a little bit of a glimpse on, what she did for her senior design, and then you can ask her any questions about the environmental engineering program that you have. So, Christina, thank you.
Hi, everyone. It was interesting to be asked to come join this open house because it's been 3 years since I last worked on my senior design. So senior design, like Melissa said, it takes a whole academic year. And for me, Marissa here, Maria Crisoko was my advisor, and our sponsor was CME. So we got to work with an advisor from CME. And my project was about the remediation and redevelopment of a mill called the Belding Corticelli Mill, and it's in the town of Thompson, Connecticut. You can go to, for those who don't know what remediation is just a fancy word for fixing and cleaning up a contaminated site. Marissa, you can go to the next slide. So a bit of history about the site is that long ago in the 1800s, this site was used to produce cotton and synthetic thread and other chemicals. And then it was abandoned in 1986. And most of the mill was already destroyed and demolished in 2006. So when we got to work on our site, there were only 3 structures left. And these are the pictures that we took when we got to visit the site. So there is a smokestack left on the left side. And then there's a guardhouse and a tower. So we were told by CME and our client, the town of Thompson, to not demolish these structures because they have historical value. So whatever we wanted to propose for this site, we had to keep these structures on. And so another piece of information that is really important is that the site was located next to a water body. So it was the French River. So we had to make sure that if there was any contamination, none of the contamination entered the river and spread elsewhere. Marissa, you can go to the next slide. So before I go into the tasks we had to perform, so my senior design group was a bit more, I would say it was a bit special. We had a hybrid group, so it was 2 environmental engineers. So one of them was me, and then we got to collaborate with 2 civil engineers because our project had a structural part in it as well. So going into the tasks as a environmental engineer, part of the task was identifying the contaminants that were in the contamination site. So these contaminants for our site was ETPH and PAHs, which are related to the fact that this site used a lot of petroleum. So these contaminants were in the site, like as you can see on the top photo, that's the oil residue in part of the structures that were left. And there was also lead contamination in the soil as well. So another important thing that environmental engineers have to know is the fate and transport of these contaminants. So we want to know how these contaminants would end up affecting the air, soil, and water. And for our site, the contamination was mainly in the soil. And then I got a chance to get really familiar with the Connecticut remediation standard regulations, which are the regulations that you have to follow it in order to clean up the site. So to what extent does the site need to be cleaned up? And there's like different requirements if the site is industrial or commercial a residential area, but I won't go too in detail with that. And another part was also like figuring out how we would remediate the site, and I'll go into that later on. So our other two civil engineers came in when they had to reinforce the retaining wall. So our site, the contamination was being retained by this wall that was like very old and weakening. So the civil engineers designed a way to like try to reinforce the wall and make sure that none of the contamination would go into the river. So in the bottom photo, you can see that that water is the river, and then at the bottom is the wall, which is like cracked open. And so, Marissa, you can go to the fourth slide. So our final plan as environmental engineers, we had to consider a lot of different aspects of the site. So like I said, the wall was very weakening and had to be reinforced. And because the soil contamination was really close to the river, we were kind of limited on what we could do to remediate the site. So we couldn't get rid of the soil completely, because if we excavated the soil all the way, then the wall would fall apart. So what we decided at the end was to design a soil cap for different parts of the field. And for the soil cap, we got rid of some of the contaminated soil, and then we designed it so that there would be an impermeable layer that would make sure that the contamination would not reach the public. And then we designed like different areas for the garden and for the parking lot. So these are regulations that need to be followed for soil cap designing. And then on the right side was what we designed as a whole group. We decided that the area would be a great spot to work as a cafe or a Starbucks, because the spot, the Thompson, Connecticut, like that contamination site was a really nice site, and it's just sad to see it all contaminated. So we decided that it would work as a great spot for a cafe.